This concerns me, and I can't get it out of my mind. It's something that affects you, affects me, affects everyone. And I'd like to make it more aware because I think it's important. Everyone sees how AI is helping, how it's progressing, this AI hype. But I'm not sure how many people and to what degree do they see how AI is reshaping society. But I think that if we want to live in a true democracy, it is necessary that everyone must be aware of this. So I want to zoom out first. I want to tell a story, not about AI. I will talk about this later, but first about more generally technology. Technology is that which allows us to extract more from nature, to produce more. If you look at history, every leap in technology has let us pull out more out of nature. Fire, the plow, steam engines, electricity, internet, because we are talking about resources, energy. Whoever controls the resources has the power, the money, the influence to shape the society in a particular direction. Whoever owns the tech owns the power. Is this not clearly seen? Amazon, Apple, Spotify in the music industry, now NVIDIA with its chips, Microsoft, Google, these are all tech companies. Are they not the ones who have dominated entire industries? Are they not the ones that have most of the money? Are they not the ones who control most of the information that we see and interact with? Are these not the companies that sit in the boardroom with the world leaders? What I'm describing is what can be called as historical materialism. The simple idea that it is technology that drives how a society looks like because it is technology that shapes production. And it is production that gives structure to society, what we believe, what we think, the information we have. Just like in quantum theory, you can model it and think about it through calculus and wave mechanics or through linear algebra and matrices. You can obviously model a society from many different angles or lenses, from different entry points. But I find that trying to model society from this angle leads to the richest and most accurate view or description of how society works. Namely, that human survival has always depended on us extracting information from nature and then creating tools, i.e. tech, to enrich our lives. Now, what exactly does this tech do? It saves us energy. If you have to plow the field to plant seeds with your bare hands, it will take you forever. If you have a shovel, you will be thankful. If you have a tractor, God bless. Now, if I own the tractor, I can farm my lands and I will have plenty of food for the winter and hence ensuring my survival. But you will be very hungry with your mere shovel. And because I will have an abundance of food, of energy, people will flock to me because everyone likes to have wealthy connections. It benefits them. Everyone wants a piece of the pie. But also, people will have some resentment as to why is it that I have the tractor and not them. Especially if I finished plowing my fields and now the tractor is just standing there idle. Meanwhile, you have to still plow the field with your shovel. You would be very unhappy if this was the case. And all of human history, you see that there is always some concentration of wealth and power that exists. And this forms the hierarchical structures that we see historically. The economic systems of slavery, of feudalism, and more recently of capitalism, with something which can be called as wage slavery. In capitalism, it developed because new technology emerged thanks to discoveries in chemistry and thermodynamics that allowed for inventions and attainment of resources, such as steel, such as oil, such as the steam engines, the automobiles. Ideas of physics that came from the 1700s, in which shortly after, a capitalist boom occurred. And we went from societies that had kings and queens to capitalists, from people who worked the lands to people who worked the factories. But the same hierarchy still exists. That's why we don't live in a democracy. We live in a hierarchy of a society. There is political democracy, but this is more or less an illusion. Real democracy is economics, the ability for people to decide how is the wealth distributed and into what does the wealth go into. And just like the slaves who don't want to do the hard, difficult slave work held resentment to the kings and queens, so now too do workers, now less so in factories and more so in corporate offices, don't wish to do this kind of work. And there is struggle for who gets how much of the resources, the overall energy that exists in the society. This struggle for this energy is what can be called as class conflict. It makes a lot of sense. This class conflict is what we see in society today. The fight for equal pay, the movements like feminism, Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ, immigration stuff, people discussing free or paid healthcare, how much to tax the rich, the poor, how much government involvement in businesses. All of these aspects of modern society that every human being cares about one issue or another, and that all of us are affected by, is a subset of this idea of class conflict. The tension between groups of people that is first and foremost based on how much resource you have at your disposal, aka your financial status. This is why the popular book started with, all history is the history of class struggle. Every change is a result of a struggle, a tension, a battle between who gets how much of the resources, the energy. And as a person who studied physics to this PhD level, I love this view because it ties so well with the view that all can be thought of as energy and how it moves and transfers, including modeling a society. Now, I like to ask my friends and people I meet some deeper questions, get to know where they are in life, what views they have, and I like to figure out, are most people happy with their lives? I would really like to know, if you and I were to go outside and survey ideally the entire world, do you think most people would survey themselves as being happy or not? I'm curious what people think. If I were asked this, in my view, I would say this. Looking at the numbers, I would say that capitalism, as properly expressed by defenders of the system, is that it indeed gave us so much. And I would even recommend a book, actually. This one called Factfulness, 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. It's written by these two medical doctors who present a load of statistics and graphs from reliable sources that clearly show that compared to 100 and even 50 years ago, we live like kings. We live incredibly better than what people 100 years ago lived like. But here is the core issue. Despite the fact that capitalism as a system has solved the problem of wealth, we all have so much stuff, and yet for some reason, when I ask people about their lives, I get the view that many people, too many people, are not happy. Despite having so much, people are mentally struggling. How do you explain this? So much wealth, but happiness at a low. Depression, loneliness, anxiety, stress, body image and health issues, shitty corporate jobs. I have friends in corporate offices. It's a mind fuck. Just like in early 1900s on the assembly line, workers were doing the same hand motion for 12 hours straight. Now it's obviously replaced by machinery. But same thing with office work, all your Excel and plugging in numbers. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but most jobs in these corporate offices are pretty mind-numbing, especially to do them for like 9 hours straight. I think that these are not mind-numbing activities, and it is not what the human being has potential for. And these are side effects, the negatives of the system of capitalism. In other words, the wonders of capitalism is that it has solved the problem of wealth, the ability to mass produce enough stuff for everyone. But now the next problem is a social one. How do people live together with respect and love? How do people live healthy lives for their mind and body? How do people feel fairness from their government, from their companies, from their social systems and services? And these types of problems are what will be solved by the new system, which can be called socialism. It is the system that solves these next type of problem, the social problem. Now, I understand a lot of people get the jitters when they hear this word, socialism, especially conservatives. But generally, it is my experience that most people have a wrong and a misunderstanding of this word. This is my impression, that people associate this word, socialism, with the Eastern Bloc, the Soviet Union, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Communist China, where government has full control. This is wrong. This is propaganda that has been instilled in your mind for far too long, and I think it only hurts society. Socialism is not about a centralized government having all the resources and making decisions for the people. This is what ought to be referred to as state capitalism. Communist China, Soviet Union, this is where a huge amount of wealth was concentrated in the state, a state that is not democratic and is controlled by one party, a tiny elite, structured in a very hierarchical manner. It is just like the United States. The only difference is that the United States, this wealth is concentrated in corporations, as opposed to the Soviet Union, where it was the state. There is no socialism in Soviet Union. They never had communism. They had attempts at social ideas, maybe certain directions initially, but by definition, they could not have been socialist society. Why? Because the definition of socialism is, quote unquote, a system where the resources, businesses, and industries that produce goods and services are owned and controlled by the community. In order for this to be true, it must be a democracy. The Soviet Union, a one-party state like China, is nowhere near a democracy. So how can the people own and make decisions about the economic distribution in such a state? The answer is they can't. Hence, they are not a proper representation, they are not a proper definition of true socialism. Socialism and democracy are entangled concepts. They cannot be separated by definition. Now, to all my religious friends, if you associate socialism with Stalin and Mao and the horrors that happened in the 20th century, then why is it not equal for me to associate Christianity with the horrors created by the Crusades? Or to associate Islam with the horrors done by the Taliban? If you consider these to be wrong associations and a misrepresentation of your beautiful religions, then you ought to give me the same footing to make the claim that there is a wrong association with the word socialism. Now, in any case, whatever you call it, at the end of the day, find a new word for it. My thesis about class conflict and the modern social dilemma still stand. So the question is how to solve the social problem. That is, the enormous amount of wealth and yet the majority of unhappy people. Now we get to AI, because this is a new piece of technology, radically incredible. And we are at a turning point in history. ChatGPT 5 is around the corner. It is crucial that we understand this new piece of technology which will shape production and change how society works. The foundations of Marxism is more of a scientific theory, not an ideology, because it is a model of how society works. It can predict certain things. In this case with AI, I want to say one prediction that is bound to happen or ought to happen is universal basic income, a social program that must be installed given the fact that AI will indeed take over and replace many jobs. And as we have already seen with the Writers Guild in Hollywood, there will be protests beforehand in order to solve this problem with how AI is replacing jobs. And these protests is an example of how conflict theory is expressed. And universal basic income is the answer. In any case, this new tech, AI, it is like the tractor compared to the shovel. And if indeed the mass population will not be aware of what it is and how it works and how to deal with it, such as to minimize the negative consequences arising from this new piece of technology, then instead of heading in a direction of a democracy, we may fall into this 1984-like mass surveillance, speech-controlled, market propagandized, corporate government controlled society. As Yanis Varoufakis, a Greek economist, wrote in his book, which I recommend, it may be called a techno-feudalism, where you are owned by your owners, the big tech corporations. It might be a positive techno-feudalism, something like in the book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, but it won't be a democracy, a form of freedom and equality for people, equality and opportunity. It would be a modern form of slavery, a sort of positive slavery. And so this is the reason why I wanted to share these thoughts in this video. I want to see, does my logic and worldview hold? And what are people's perception? What do you think? If I have any gaps in these thoughts, I would like to know. I would like to hear your thoughts.